My name is Moses Gashirabake, and I am both Rwandan and Canadian. I studied political science at Concordia University. I graduated with honors. And then after that, I pursued law at McGill University. So I hold 2 law degrees in common law and civil law as well. And in terms of organizations, I am currently a board member with 4 organizations. The Canadian Race Relations Foundation, based in Toronto, the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, that's based in Montreal, the Rwandan Canadian Healing Center, based in Toronto, and then the International Rwanda Youth for Development, and also the Foundation for Genocide Education. Actually, it's 5 organizations and not 4. It's just because I do chair the Rwandan Canadian Healing Center, so I'm not a board member, but the chair of the board. And in terms of my career, I am in the legal practice field. So I advise businesses, institutions, and governments on different areas of law in business, environmental law, and other sectors. First of all, I am Black, originally from Rwanda, so I came to Canada as an immigrant refugee. So essentially, I am categorized within, I guess, the racialized Black minority. So that's my identity as a Black person of African descent. Automatically, falls into the racialized minority category. And essentially, when I came to Canada, the reason actually why I'm studying political science is I wanted to understand, how policies affect society, so governance, decision making, and the outcomes. And definitely, especially, recently, racism and anti-racism have become quite important, not just in Canada, but across the globe. We all know the unfortunate murder of George Floyd, which, not only highlighted something that has been going on for hundreds of years, beginning with the transatlantic slave, where Black people and Black and other racialized minorities have faced discrimination in policing, in housing, in educational opportunities, and other sectors. So, my desire to pursue an education in political science and law was essentially to understand how I could help my community. And that, has been manifested in my community engagements where, for example, with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, we provide strategic advice on how research and other resources can be provided to not only the government of Canada, but community organizations across Canada to look at how institutions and governments, and this is at all levels, the federal level, and the provincial level and the municipal level, can eliminate systemic racism in many sectors, housing, education, policing, name it. So, this is an issue that speaks directly to me as a Black person of African descent, somebody who came from Rwanda as a refugee to Canada, and then trying to understand the society that I live in. The most important topic for me today is definitely anti-racism and looking at how racism affects the Black population. And I think the most important tool that we can use is education. So through awareness campaigns, through academic research, through community organizations connecting not just on the local scene, but on a national scale. So being able to share information and looking at how, for example, Black Nova Scotians are doing as compared to Black people in Montreal. We know, for example, in Montreal, a majority of the Black population in Montreal, if you look at the Anglophone sections of the city, they do not only face racism based on color, but they also face racism based on language, because most of them tend to be Anglophone, and then they find themselves in a province or a city that's predominantly Francophone. So, the different experiences could definitely be shared, and then looking at the best practices that communities can use in their local organizations. So looking at the needs at the local level. So the needs of Black Anglophones in Quebec are similar to the needs of Black Anglophones in Nova Scotia, but they could also be different. And, they also are different in Toronto and other cities. But then, sharing platforms. For example, recently there has been the Federation of Black Canadians and the Black North Initiative that's trying to unite Black community organizations across Canada, not just on the social realm of society, but also business, investments, and also on the political front as well, because political activism and actually Black organizations across Canada at the local, provincial, and federal level coming together to really advocate for their needs with the different levels of government, and obviously going up to the federal government, I think is important. And that will require unity across the board. So I think, the work that I've seen with the Federation of Black Canadians, the Black North Initiatives, and of course, the Canadian Race Relations Foundation coming in to hold roundtables and bringing in all actors, both local grassroots organizations, regional organizations, and national organizations to come together, I think is going to be quite instrumental in raising awareness and education across Canada. Because one of the things that has really come out, and there is a recent survey from the Environics Institute that highlighted the fact that awareness in regard to racism across Canada is not at the level that it needs to be. So a lot of Canadians don't even believe that racism exists, or that they are racist, in the sense that racism is not just the explicit displaying where someone is, for example, called the N-word, or being directly denied a job opportunity or an educational opportunity. But we also have racism that manifests in unconscious bias and microaggressions and other types of not explicit but implicit bias and covert racism. So these are the things that we think that every Canadian needs to know, and of course within the Black community, it's based on experience. We've seen racism, we've experienced racism, and it continues to be a part of society, not just at the institutional level, but at the individual level. But with organizations coming together and raising awareness through education and educating both affected communities and communities that are perpetuating racism, I think it's one of the most important things we can do now. There have been a myriad of effects to the different community organizations that I'm part of. and of course, the effects have been different for each community organization. In terms of the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, we've definitely received a heightened level of interest in the work that we do. So across Canada, from all the way from Vancouver to Nova Scotia, so St. John's, we've received requests from Canadians. Most of them expressing support and saying, we want to support your work and we want to empower you to continue doing the work that you do. So we've seen a rise in people coming to ask us, and that shows that the issues of racism and race relations are somewhat coming to the attention of Canadians, because obviously we have the 24-hour news cycle that raises an issue, the death of George Floyd in the U.S., and all of a sudden you have different communities and Canadians acting. But I think that it's still more that's going to be done, because when you look at the requests that we've received within the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, these are requests from either communities or community organizations or members that are, in most cases, aware, or they have an interest in the issue of race and racism and race relations. So even though we're receiving more requests and people wanting to understand the work that we do, more needs to be done to get to every corner and everyone across Canada. For example, I think one of the most important things that we can do is initiating a national awareness campaign. Some sort of campaign that you see on TV, on billboards across Canada, on radio, and on websites and major news organizations, in order for us to bring the issue really from the cities to the rural areas of Canada. In terms of other organizations that I work with, for example, the Rwandan Canadian Healing Center, the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, the International Rwanda Youth for Development, and the Foundation for Genocide Education. I think there has been, to some extent, because of the global pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic has affected the ability for those organizations to raise funds and resources, and obviously available resources were dedicated to adapting to the new reality. So ensuring that the programming that we have, for example, with the board meetings, the engagement events and conferences had to be, adapted to online situations, and that, there is a cost. Staff are working from home, and these are, effects that are happening across the board. But I think community organizations have been affected more significantly. And of course, the government of Canada provided funding for community organizations through the Canadian Red Cross, United Way, and the Community Foundations of Canada. But unfortunately, that money did not go to all community organizations. So we're looking for ways that, those who are left behind, because some of the ones that I'm even involved in did not receive any funding. So this is, a continued discourse that is going to be looked at and see how the recovery phase post-COVID-19 is going to happen, and ensuring that the services and resources and programming and funding that these organizations were accustomed to before the pandemic continue to be available. So essentially, that's the summary, with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation being a national organization that has been working on racial issues and race relations for a long time. We received more requests, and then the other organizations needing more capacity building and looking at recovery post-COVID-19. So in addition to having a national campaign to fight against racism and systemic racism, I think we also need a national organization that is specifically charged with advocacy and, if you call it even lobbying, the institutions that are charged with holding power. I think advocacy and raising awareness go hand in hand, and we need to go beyond, the 24-hour news cycle where, a policeman in the U.S. or Canada kills a black man or an Asian man, an indigenous person, and then the 24-hour news cycle, it runs for 1 week and then that's it. We forget about it. This is absolutely unacceptable. So human life is sacred, and human life has to be protected at all costs. And the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms guarantee equal rights to all Canadians, including, the fundamental and basic right to life. So I think we need to find a way to consistently, a funded organization that works to consistently hold accountable local municipalities, provincial governments across Canada from coast to coast, and the federal government, and holding them accountable and asking them to, to respect and to create a harmonious Canada, a race-free Canada. So I think, these are, of course, continuing conversations that I think will need local organizations, regional organizations, and national organizations to come together and work to consistently raise awareness and even advocate for the needs of racialized minorities in order to end systemic racism. Thanks. I think I'm calling upon, all Canadians to educate ourselves. I mean, I also need that constant education. I cannot, pretend to know the needs of all Black communities across Canada. Every, local community across Canada has its own specific needs, based on their history, how long they've been in Canada. For example, if you look at the African Canadian, the recent wave of African Canadian immigrants, they have completely different needs. If you look at, people from the Caribbean, or people who recently came to Canada, or people who came here as a result of the unfortunate transatlantic slave trade. So being able to educate ourselves and understanding the needs, I think, is important. And in terms of, action items, self-education and acknowledging that systemic racism exists. Unfortunately, we have lots of people that haven't recognized that systemic racism exists, but with awareness and education, we can be able to bring attention to the issues that exist. So I think, those are the concrete actions that we can take, educating ourselves and hopefully educating others, and then having an institution that is charged with doing that work to make it more formalized. In terms of resources, I would definitely invite everyone to look at our website. So you can Google CRRF. We have a clearinghouse where we provide different resources and materials, research papers that could be useful to community organizations, institutions to look at the best practices in education, and also research on existing forms of racism in different sectors of Canadian society. I think there's also another excellent organization in Montreal, so the Black Community Resource Center, based in Montreal. And I invite you to also look at other organizations such as the Rwandan Canadian Healing Center. If you go on Google and type that, you could be able to see the work that we do, and essentially looking at how, for example, with the Rwandan Canadian Healing Center, how Rwandans who came to Canada following and even before the 1984 genocide against the Tutsi are affected in terms of mental health, and that mental health is even made worse by systemic racism. When you come in as an immigrant, as a refugee, but you don't have equal access to housing, or if you have housing, it impedes you from being able to access other opportunities because housing is expensive. There is a shortage of affordable housing options for new immigrants. So, and how all of that affects people from a mental perspective. So those are some of the resources that I could be able to share to our audience.